Hello guys, this is Daniel and it is a pleasure for me to start this new series that we prepare for you. In this series we are going to be exploring Vyper. And the reason that we are going to be exploring Vyper is that we received a lot of feedback from you guys regarding the fact that you feel very comfortable with Python, but telling us that you don't feel very at home with JavaScript and with Solidity. Well, the good news is that for using Morales to develop your dApps, you don't need more than a very basic understanding of JavaScript. And if you know how to import some scripts into your code, for example, Bootstrap, you know enough JavaScript to use Morales. Now, you will need to develop smart contracts, and for that, you either need Solidity or Vyper. And since Vyper is heavily inspired by Python and its aim is to be very Pythonic in its syntax, I think that is going to be a very good tool for you to have in your toolkit if you are a Python developer and you want to jump into Web3 development to have a Vyper. So that's the reason that we decided to make this series. Now, what this series is going to be about is to give you general knowledge about Vyper using a very basic HelloWorld contract. And then we are going to implement our old friend guess the number contract that we did in previous series in this channel, and we're going to implement it in Vyper. In the previous videos, in the previous series that we have made, all of that code has been written in Solidity, and we have referenced that code very superficially because knowing Solidity was not supposed to be a prerequisite for those series that were supposed to be very introductory. For this series, however, it is assumed that you have watched the previous two series that we had made regarding using the Web3 Python library and what we built on top of that, which is Brownie development, because for using Vyper, you need the framework, you need Brownie. So if you get stuck in any Brownie related issue, jump back if you have not watched those series to understand what is going on. To start with this, we first need to have our virtual environment properly set up, which we have here. We're already there. We need to install Brownie, which we already did in this case. So remember for that is pip install eth Brownie. And then after you do that, you will do Brownie init, and you will put the name of your program, of your project. In this case, I did Brownie init Vyper 01. And then after doing that, you would have created this structure of folders that we have here. We are going to be working mostly in this series in the contracts space over here. And we're going to be leveraging the Brownie console very heavily. Now, having done that, there's another part that it's part of the housekeeping that is mentioned in the first video of our Brownie series that we made previously, is that we need to have our local Ganache link to our Brownie development environment. And for that, we do Brownie networks list. And you're going to see that in this case, and this is going to take a while to appear, I have the local network here, which is the one that I set up to deal with my local Ganache over here. And this is very important because we are going to be using this local Ganache network for deploying our contracts. So the steps of how to do that are explained in the video in the Brownie series, so I will not go into that in this video. And then what you need to do, and I haven't done it here yet, is to actually start our Brownie config to let Brownie know how we're going to be interacting with our network. So for that, we have to do a touch. Let's go to our main project here. So first cd Vyper 01. Now that we are inside that folder, we are going to do touch Brownie config.yaml. And now that we have that already set up there, we are going to create our YAML file that we need to configure our Brownie environment. So For that, we're going to do networks, and in networks, we're going to put default, and in that one, we're gonna write a local. And that will set up the networks to work with our Brownie. So to check out that everything is working fine, we do Brownie console. And we see that we are connecting to our local host here, which is this one here, and you can see it here. So that's great. We are properly connected, so we can continue. Remember that for doing all of this part, you can check the first video of our Brownie series that we did before. Now, let's exit our Brownie console, and we are going to start creating our first Vyper smart contract. And for that, we are going to do the following. We are going to do touch, and we are going to do contracts. And in contracts, we are going to open this Hello World. And this is going to be our Hello World contract. And we are going to call it .vy, which is the extension for Vyper. So we have it here, and there's an issue there with my length, but that's not very important for now. So for that contract, we are going to do something very, 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 very simple. The structure of an smart contract, guys, has the following aspects. First, you have a pragma line. And pragma is no more than a little code that we put at the beginning that will tell our compiler what is the appropriate compiler version that it needs to run. So we need to have a pragma line. We need to have a contract identifier. This is just to identify what the contract is about. There is a big difference between Vyper and Solidity regarding this. In Solidity, you identify your contracts as specific objects inside your Solidity file, inside your .sol file. In Vyper, you don't do that because Vyper assumes that each .vy file is one single standalone contract. So that's the way it is. You cannot have several contracts in the same file. Vyper doesn't like that. So that's the other part that you need to have. You need to have your storage variables are called in Vyper. In Solidity, these are called state variables, which are the ones that store the state of the contract. Then we need to have functions, which is where all the logic of our contract is going to live. This is the structure, the basic structure of a Vyper contract. Now, let's start developing that. So for the pragma line, we are going to do the following. We are going to do the same comment, and this is the same way as you comment in Python. We are going to put this kind of like a decorator there. We're going to do version, and for the compiler version, I'm going to choose 020 as the version. A little reminder is that Vyper is a little bit in an experimental state, so don't expect to have as much tools as you have for Solidity, but we are going to put here a lot of the knowledge that you need to actually make your smart contracts work. Now, a contract identifier, we don't really need to specify it inside the actual code as we would in Solidity. Now we need a storage variables there. And for this specific contract as it is right now and the way that we are going to set it up from the outset, we are not going to have storage variables yet. And for functions, we are going to have only one function at this moment. And we are going to put some decorators here that set the characteristics of this function. So we are going to have one external and pure function. And external means that this function can be called from the outside, from outside the contract itself. And pure means that it's a function that is not changing the state of the contract, meaning that if there were some storage variables around here, and let's say that we're going to call them right now, let's create some variables here, but we're not going to use them. So let's do a greeting. And this is something that will not sound, the first thing that is different from Python here. Greeting, we are defining the name here, but we need to define a type. So we're going to say greeting is going to be a string of length 100, and that's it. We have to declare the type of the variables when we are introducing them for the first time. This is something that you don't have to do in Python, but you have to do it in Vyper. But the rest, as you see, looks very Pythonic until now. Now we have to define our function, and this is also very Pythonic. We are going to do def greet me. We are going to put it here, and now we are going to return some response when this function is called, and we are going to call it, since it's greet me, it's going to tell me hello Daniel. And that's it. That's our first function, but is not going to work because of some reason that you are going to see right now. So I will try to load the Brownie console again, and every time you load the Brownie console, the contract is going to try to compile, and let's see what happened. And now it's going to tell us the actual error that I'm expecting. And here it is. So what is going on there is that it's telling us that this function doesn't return any values, but we are returning a string here. And this is the other part that is not very Pythonic. In Vyper, you have to establish the type that the function is going to return. If you are going to return anything from that function, you have to establish its type. And this is the main reason that Vyper, it might be a little bit different from Python, is that it's a strongly typed language. And the reason it is that way is because for programming the smart contracts, you have to have a lot of assurances that the code that you wrote works, at least in the formal sense. So we are going to have this arrow here, which points to an outcome of the function, and we're going to say that this function is going to return a string of length 100. Then we add our column here, and we are going to clear our screen, and then we are going to call the console again, and now it's going to work. And here we are, we're inside the console. Now we are going to try to deploy this contract. So we're going to do, as you remember from our previous sessions, we have HelloWorld here, which is identified as our program here. And this object has a method that is called deployed. And this deployed has some parameters that we need to pass, and what we need to pass is what address is going to deploy this contract. So we are going to just close it here, and we are going to call from accounts 0 for now. And if you don't understand what I'm doing here, I really recommend that you go back to our deploying contracts with Brownie video in one of the previous series that goes into details in how to deploy a contract with Brownie. What we are doing here is just calling this method deploy from this compile contract that we have here. And since the deployment has to have a value regarding which Ethereum account is actually deploying that contract, we need to pass this dictionary here that describes that. We don't need any other parameters because this function here or the constructor itself, which doesn't exist in this contract yet, is not taking any parameters. So we are just going to call it right now. And our contract is deployed, and that means that we have access to its functions. So we're going to do another reference to that contract. And since we are in the same Brownie session, we have access to the deployment as Hello World index 0. And that is because this object got a deployment here, which lives inside this address, and this is already referenced into this Brownie console inside the memory. You can confirm that by len hello world here, and this should give us 1, and that is basically this deployment over here. If we have exit this Brownie session, then we will have to go to Ganache to know what is this address and then create a link to that. You can go to our deploying with Brownie videos in the previous series to check on that. This session is mostly about the Vyper itself, not about Brownie. So let's do our reference then. So we have hello world, and we do the index 0, and from there we have access to these functions, and the function that we want to call is the greetme function, and we're going to call it like this. If you follow until now, you were able to create and deploy your first smart contract in Vyper. So guys, this is all for today. If you like this type of content, please follow the Morales channel and smash that like. Thank you very much.